Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're getting our hands a little dirty, I guess you could say. We're diving into the world of organic rice disease management. So we're talking about, rice, a staple food for billions of people,
Absolutely.
keeping those grains healthy and, crucially organic
Yeah.
is no small feat.
It's a fascinating blend, it really is, of ancient practices and then this like cutting edge science that's all coming together.
Yeah. And speaking of science, the article we have from Farmonaut, they dive right into the nitty-gritty of fungal infections, and they highlight rice blast as like a particularly tough one for rice farmers.
Yeah.
Expert speaker, can you give us a sense of the stakes here?
Oh, totally.
Like, what kind of impact can this disease have, really?
So imagine like, you know how a bullseye looks on a target?
Right.
That's kind of what rice blast looks like on a rice leaf.
Oh,
And it just kind of spreads like wildfire through the plant. It's really something. And it ultimately impacts, those precious grains that we need. We could see like 70 to 80% yield loss, which is
wow.
yeah, it can be devastating, especially for those communities that depend on rice, not just for their food, but their livelihood as well.
70 to 80%. That's massive. So this fungus, I mean, it sounds like it has a pretty
It's sneaky.
a devious strategy.
It is.
How does it actually even infect the plants in the first place?
So this is a patient fungus,
Right.
right? It can survive on like leftover plant debris. Sometimes you get those volunteer rice plants that sprout up when you're not expecting them.
Right.
It'll just hang out there biding its time. But when conditions are right, when it gets humid, warm, it releases its spores.
Oh, okay.
And these spores, they're carried by wind, by rain. They're like these tiny little landmines just waiting to land on healthy plants.
Oh, wow. So once they land, is that it? Is it game over for the rice plant?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. That's where early detection comes in. That's something that the article really stresses.
Okay.
Think of it this way, right? If you catch a fire when it's just a little spark,
Mm-hmm.
you can put it out pretty easily, right? It's the same idea here. Those first signs of infection, the article mentions these diamond-shaped lesions with the gray centers and those dark borders. That's what you got to be on the lookout for.
So early intervention is key.
Absolutely.
But how do farmers, what are they doing organically to fight back against this fungus?
Well, it's not just one thing. One of the big things that they emphasize is this idea of integrated disease management.
Okay.
It's not just one thing, but it's this whole approach combining all these different organic methods so they work together.
So it's like a system then that works with nature instead of against it.
Exactly.
Right. And the article mentioned a bunch of different approaches. Crop rotation, I think they said something about biological control, which sounds a little, I don't know, almost too good to be true.
It does sound like something out of like a sci-fi novel, right?
Yeah.
But it's real and it's actually incredibly effective. It's kind of like you're enlisting this microscopic army
Okay.
to fight for your rice plants.
See, now you have to explain that.
Right.
How does biological control even work?
So it's actually pretty cool. You're basically introducing these beneficial microorganisms into the rice paddy. So think bacteria, fungi, the good guys, right?
Mhm.
And they compete with that rice blast fungus, and they can actually suppress its growth and even stop it from infecting the plants in the first place.
So they're just out competing them for resources.
Exactly. It's like, we talk about our gut microbiome, right?
Right.
It's about creating that healthy balance in the soil too.
So it's the same idea. So are these like special microorganisms? They have to manufacture these or something?
No, they're already there. They're already present in the soil, especially healthy soil. So it's more about creating the right conditions for them to thrive.
So giving them a little boost.
Exactly, yeah. Like adding compost, for example, or using cover crops, things that increase the biodiversity of the soil.
That's incredible. I mean, all this stuff happening underground that we never even think about.
A whole world down there.
Right.
A whole ecosystem beneath our feet. And speaking of working with nature, the article also gets into the cultural control methods.
Right.
These are those practices that can really disrupt that rice blast's life cycle and just make it harder for it to take hold.
Yeah, like that crop rotation that we were talking about before.
Yeah.
Could you remind me how that works again?
Yeah. So it's pretty straightforward, actually. You're just alternating rice with these non-host crops. So these are plants that the rice blast fungus can't infect, so you're basically breaking the cycle.
Right. So they can't live on it.
Exactly.
They just die off.
You're starving them out.
I love it.
Yeah.
Starve them out. What other cultural methods are we talking about here? What else do they highlight?
Water management is another big one that's
Okay.
really important.
So too much water, bad.
Too much water is bad. Too little water is bad. You got to find that sweet spot. It's like the Goldilocks of,
Right.
rice blasts. So careful irrigation and drainage. That's key.
Okay.
Making sure it's just right for the rice, but not so much for the fungus. And of course, choosing the right rice variety to begin with.
Right, right. Because some are naturally more resistant, right?
Absolutely. Some varieties just have this natural resistance to rice blast, which is huge. It's like, giving your plants armor before they even head into battle.
So we've got our biological control, our cultural methods, and then our choosing the right rice to begin with. Anything else that these farmers have up their sleeves? Any other tools in the organic toolbox?
Well, the article does mention organic fungicides as kind of a last resort. Things like copper-based fungicides or some plant-based extracts. But the idea is always to minimize their use and really exhaust those other options first.
So just being
Cautious.
cautious, yeah. Because even though they're organic, they could still have unintended consequences, right?
Yeah, it's all about balance. You're trying to protect the crop, of course, but you've got to preserve that ecosystem too. And, that's really what integrated disease management is all about, finding that balance.
And the article, they give this really nice six-step approach. It's very clear that kind of brings all these strategies together.
Yeah, it's a great tool. It gives farmers a really good framework to follow. And it really highlights how important that early detection is.
Right. So the earlier you can catch it, the better.
Absolutely.
But how do you even monitor something as massive as a rice paddy?
Mm-hmm.
Especially effectively, right?
Yeah.
It just seems like a huge undertaking.
Well, that's where technology comes in.
Okay.
The article talks about Farmonaut's satellite-based monitoring. That's really changing the game.
Wait, hold on. Satellites. They can tell if there's rice blast from space.
They can.
Wow.
It's really cool. They use this thing called multispectral imaging. Basically, these satellites, they pick up on these subtle changes in the plants.
Way.
So we're talking things like temperature variations or even changes in the chlorophyll content of the leaves.
Yeah.
These are all things that oftentimes you can't even see with the naked eye.
So these are like early warning signs.
Exactly. So by the time those lesions are visible, it might be too late. But these satellites, they're giving farmers that early warning, that heads up.
That's incredible. So compared to like the old way of doing things, what does the article say are some of the big advantages? So we were talking about, the advantages that these satellites have over the traditional way of monitoring for rice blast.
Right, right.
What did Farmonaut say were some of the like big takeaways from that comparison?
Well, they highlighted a few things. Speed and accuracy are two of the big ones. Traditional scouting, it's valuable, but it's really time consuming, especially when you're talking about these large farms,
Yeah, for sure.
And honestly, let's face it, it's easy to make mistakes, right?
Right.
Humans aren't perfect. Satellites, though, they're giving you this really fast, objective look at everything that's going on in your field.
Right, the whole thing.
The whole thing.
Wow.
And like we were talking about, they can often spot those problems, those little signs, before you'd ever even be able to see them yourself.
It's like Star Trek or something.
I know, right?
Scanning for diseases from orbit. That's incredible.
It's pretty amazing. And, it's not just about reacting to these problems after they pop up. It's about being smarter with how we use resources too, right?
Oh, okay.
So if you can pinpoint exactly where there's an issue, you can be much more precise with things like how much water you're using, fertilizers, treatments.
That makes sense, yeah.
So you're reducing waste, you're lessening that impact on the environment, and ideally, you're even boosting your yield in the process.
So it's a win-win.
Exactly. Everybody wins.
It's really amazing to see just how far we've come. And how much potential there is to make things even more sustainable, even more resilient moving forward. What does Farmonaut see as some of the, what's on the horizon for organic rice disease management?
Well, there are a few really interesting areas of research that they highlight.
Okay.
One is that, they're always trying to develop rice varieties that are even more resilient than the ones we have now.
Oh, okay. So even better than what we have.
Even better. And they're using some really cool techniques to do it. Things like marker-assisted selection, where they're identifying the genes that make a plant resistant.
So like breeding it into them then, essentially.
Exactly. It's like giving those rice plants like an immune system upgrade.
Right. I like it.
And then there's also a lot of research going into biocontrol, right? Like, can we find even better, more effective biocontrol agents than the ones we're using now?
So those good microbes.
The good microbes, exactly. So, scientists are looking at different species, they're trying different formulations. It's all about finding that sweet spot for how to use nature to fight these diseases.
That's so cool. All this stuff happening on a microscopic level that we totally take for granted.
Right, we do.
Or like rice. It's food, but it's a whole world down there.
It's a whole world, and as we get better technology, we're able to understand that world even better. So, scientists are learning more and more about how plants interact with those microbes,
Hmm.
especially the ones that live on and around their roots, because that's where a lot of the action is happening. And hopefully that will lead to even more ways to manage these diseases sustainably.
It's incredible. It really is incredible how much we can accomplish, how much healthier things can be when we work with nature and not against it,
Mm.
you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, expert speaker, this has been amazing.
It's been
I've
fun.
learned so much. Thank you so much for talking with us today.
Happy to do it.
And to everyone listening, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into organic rice disease management. We hope this has been interesting for you. And hey, next time you're, enjoying some delicious rice, maybe just take a second to, I don't know, think about all the hard work and the cool science that went into getting those grains from the field to your plate.
Right.
Until next time, keep those brains buzzing, and thanks for joining the deep dive.